I wonder how long it's been since I've done a review without makeup on. Hey you guys, welcome back to Cinematic Headspace. I have filmed a lot of videos, and today I thought I'd film something else. This video was actually a suggestion by one of my friends. Shout out to Sierra for suggesting this video. I am going to review a book series that I have been keeping up with for a long time. That series is called The Green Rider series by Kristen Britton, who, by the way, has a YouTube channel. So, in the case she is watching this, hello! Please do not roast me. And today, I'm going to tell you how it went from being a great series to being not so great. This will kind of be a rundown of books 1 through 5. When I read books 6 and the 7th one that I think just came out, I will be sure to give you guys a review of those individually. To summarize this video, I will just put it like this. The Green Rider series started out pretty well. It had a lot of interesting mythology and stuff going on. The characters were all great. The story was pretty interesting, aside from a few like pacing issues, which I was willing to ignore. But then as the series progressed, the writing kind of became worse, and things that I had been ignoring for previous books just kind of were just like up and center for me to look at, and I just couldn't ignore them anymore. And that is books 1 through 5. Let's go through each one of the books individually. As I drink my morning coffee, that's probably going to mess up my stomach later. So first up, we have this, Green Rider, just like the series. This book is about the main character of our series, Kerrigan Gladhion. I tried. She was expelled from school from picking a fight with a student who comes from an elite background. More so than her. Like, they hint more throughout the series about like the status of her family, but this kid was like noble, high up elite, and that got her in trouble. And then she was walking home and stumbled across this man who was dying due to some clear like battle damage, and he gave her his job of delivering a very important message to the king. And the book is pretty much just about that, her road to finding the king. This kind of didn't get very interesting until 2/3 through the book. The first 2/3 are pretty much just Kerrigan going on the journey, bonding with her horse, because horses play a very big role in the series, discovering the magic of her Green Rider pin, because Green Riders have magical powers. There's a few interesting things that happen, like she gets captured, she has to fight off some giant spiders, she meets these 2 older women who are very rich and have all these like magical items in their house, and she basically gets her future told to her, which sounds like a lot of interesting stuff, but actually those each take up 2 or 3 chapters at a time in this thick book. But when the action finally did pick up, it really picked up and it got way more interesting. We met a lot of the main characters who are going to be there throughout the series, such as Captain Mapstone, who essentially is the head honcho of the Green Riders, as well as a mentor to the king and to Kerrigan. She's very like surprisingly motherly and all that stuff, and I love it. It's great. She is awesome. This is where we also meet Alton, who is like Kerrigan's best friend, and anyone who's read the books knew I was going to mention this. This is where we meet King Zachary. Now, I did not know what to expect from King Zachary. I kind of didn't think he was going to play that big of a part in the series, anything like that, because like princes and princesses kind of tend to be more important in epic fantasy series than kings and queens are, unless they're playing like villains or something or whatever. But King Zachary is the love interest. He's an awesome character, and so is Kerrigan. They're both very interesting, smart, complex people. And so, yeah, totally root for them. Even though, because of status and danger, but mostly status and politics and all that stuff, they can't do anything. I guess my only criticism of the 2/3 through the book is that Zachary and Kerrigan just kind of insta-love. Well, it's insta-love from King Zachary's perspective, and it doesn't make any sense because they're trying to make this like kind of grounded and realistic, but also very fantasy at the same time, which, like, I'll be honest, it's pretty good at, but to make it very like insta-lovey for King Zachary was a little And that brings us to book 2, First Rider's Call. In this book, Kerrigan is officially a Green Rider, and the magic of the big creepy wall that was in the first book, that essentially is housing the big bad of the series called Mournhaven the Black, was cracked open for the first time in thousands of years, and as a result, dark magic is leaking into Socorridia. Weird name, very long. And causing a bunch of insane magical phenomenon to happen. And the people of Socorridia do not like magic. They actually aren't supposed to know that the Green Riders have magic because the people don't like magic because of an event called the 1,000 Years War. So naturally, of course, Kerrigan, the Green Riders have to do something about it, and Kerrigan is getting visions of the first Green Rider ever, who is helping her out in the form of a Brumby Scottish ghost. So naturally, there's a lot of adventure there. There is not like a ton of setup and all that stuff like there was in the first book. They just jump straight into the action. A lot of interesting stuff happened. There's romance, there's excitement, there's adventure, there's ghosts, there's everything. Like, this book was the best. So after the best book in the series, and there's 5 more, surely it continues to get good. Not really. So book number 3 was a lot like the first one, and that was very slow and had a lot of exposition. But unlike book number 1, there was never a moment where it really picked up and got interesting. It's one of those where like you get through like several upon several pages and you just sit there and realize after a certain point that nothing really has happened. The plot of this one pretty much is just that Kerrigan is worried about Mournhaven the Black coming back because in the last book, spoiler alert to how that one ends, Kerrigan was possessed by Mournhaven's ghost or something like that, and she, through the help of the ghost of the first rider, ended up banishing him to the future, and Kerrigan is just kind of worried, like, when is he coming back, and how far into the future did I really send him? Which, you know, is a reasonable concern, but it still takes up, like, way too much of the book. And then also, she's just kind of like going around and mentoring this new Green Rider kid because more people are becoming Green Riders and all that stuff, which you would think would spread awareness to some people that the Green Riders have magical powers, but apparently it doesn't. And then the only semblance of plot here is that the king's fiancée, Estera, who is a main character who has been there since book 1 and was actually secretly with the guy who died in the first book, got kidnapped, and so Kerrigan had to save her from that, and like that's it, that's the only plot. It's nothing happens, nothing changes. Mournhaven the Black is still just not around. They're no closer to figuring out how far into the future he is. Really, the plot was not moved forward at all with this book. It really wasn't. And that brings us to Black Veil, book number 4. This one was honestly an upgrade from book number 3, which, you know, thank gosh, right? This one, of course, has a lot more action than the previous ones did, and stuff happens after a decision is made with the Elysians. The Elysians are essentially the Green Rider series equivalent to the elves from Lord of the Rings. They're like these immortal, beautiful creatures who are very in touch with nature and are magical and wise and spiritual and all that stuff. I think this happened in book 3, although it didn't mean anything, of course, until this book, decided that they would like to go into Black Veil Forest and they would like the Kingsmen to come and help them or something like that. I don't remember. I haven't read this in a long time. And the Green Riders are, of course, the people who they send to go out into the forest that is Black Veil and help them. The first part of this book, I will admit, did get kind of slow because all that really happens is Kerrigan moping about how she is in love with King Zachary but can't do anything about it because status, because social class, because all the stuff. So yeah, there's that. Yeah, after like Kerrigan gets red-pilled by her dad, Kerrigan then has to attend a masquerade ball, and because Kerrigan is not like other girls and is not feminine and girly, she can't get a real dress. She has to get like a dirty old used one from the theater group, and because she's pretty and doesn't know it, King Zachary talks to her and sees her throughout the party even though he has no idea that it's her. And then a character who was introduced, I think, in the 3rd book. No, it was the 2nd book, wasn't it? Who is kind of secretly like a gentleman thief, but still like a distant cousin, I think, of King Zachary's, takes notice of Kerrigan. But But yeah, this one they go right into Black Veil. To be honest, I was kind of underwhelmed by Black Veil because I thought we were going to see all this like really cool dark magic stuff. Like they were going to a forest that has been tainted by dark magic for like hundreds or thousands of years. But aside from the fact they run into a few monsters and they run into a few old Elysian artifacts, because Black Veil was actually belonged to the Elysians until it was tainted with Mornhaven's dark magic, which is why they want to go in there. But yeah, there's some interesting stuff, I guess. So to call it like boring and underwhelming would not be fair because it did have interesting stuff in it. Just I feel like she could have gone further with it. And then at the very end, Kerrigan's sent into the future, which brings me to the next book. This book right here, Mirror Sight, actually could be the worst book I have ever read. It's basically a Victorian era steampunk romance that got inserted into an epic fantasy series, even though it has no place to be there. The rest of the video is probably going to be a rant about this, not going to lie. So this was kind of the book that, like, it picks up directly after the last one because I touched on this briefly, but the last one ended on like a very major cliffhanger, and this one you're like, oh my gosh, where does that pick up? What happens? Kerrigan wakes up in what feels like her grave. She wakes up and there's just nothing but blackness after she gets transported through time by the elves trying to save her or something like that. And then she wakes up in basically a joke coffin that was being used for like a circus prop or something. And she is 200 years into Secordia's future. And somehow, Secordia went from being a medieval kingdom to the Industrial Revolution in 200 years. By people who don't even like magic that much. So how did that happen? And she finds out pretty quickly that apparently this is 200 years to the future, and Mornhaven the Black has essentially taken over his kingdom, and she needs to go back to the past to stop that from happening, and in addition, find out how that happened. But here's the thing. That takes second seating to the like stupid little steampunk romance that took over this book. That was just stupid. So among the other issues with this book that I just touched on, by the time this book came out, any issues I had just kind of lightly been ignoring with the previous books were just like in this, emphasized, bold, underlined. I couldn't ignore them anymore. So reading this book actually made me realize stuff that was wrong with the previous books, which stinks. First of all, Kristen Britton has this really bad habit of writing in background characters who really don't do anything and then just suddenly making them important when one of them has to die or when like there needs to be a big character death. In book 4, there was a character whose name was Yates who, for the most part, really didn't do much. He was just kind of a background character. But then, you know, in the 4th book, through their time in Black Veil, he and Kerrigan suddenly became like best friends, and his death was just so tragic. Hey guys, so some stuff happened and I was unable to finish recording the video, so I'm just gonna go ahead and tell you what I was going to say back there. Kerrigan's grief for Yates after his death in book 4 is also a core element of this book. Like, a lot of it, she is seeing his ghost, or she's talking about how just sad it is that her best friend is gone and all that, when this character, for 3 books, didn't matter. And actually most of the 4th book didn't matter until they were in Black Veil. And like, she did the same thing in book 1 too. There was a character that she suddenly had to give a whole lot of exposition on, who then got killed so that it could be sad. Another big issue with this one, the characters in this book are just not as good compared to the characters in the main books. Kerrigan is in this future for the entire book, and so naturally all of the other characters are just gone for that time. So her only interactions are with new characters. There is a professor, and then there is Cade. The problem with the professor is that he's just not all that interesting, and he's not as good as other mentor-y characters that we've had throughout the series, like Captain Mapstone, among others. The problem with Cade is that he is essentially what I call the replacement love interest for Kerrigan, because Cade and the professor are working together and they both admire old Secordia, Cade wants to be a member of like the King's Guard or whatever they were, whatever the heck they were. And that's a source of drama between him and Kerrigan because apparently they are celibate. But he just can't help but look at Kerrigan when she's not noticing, and he just cannot deny their chemistry, and oh my gosh, oh the drama, blah, blah, blah. His character is very whiny and kind of dramatic, like I said, with all the stuff. They have an almost moment at one point while training, but then right after that, he's just all like, we can't do anything because I'm a guard person and I must be celibate. But then they still keep kind of like going back and forth and back and forth. Kerrigan doesn't even think he's all that attractive. At one point she says he's not bad looking. There's really nothing that Cade has that King Zachary and really kind of to a degree Alton don't have. Cade's only purpose is to give Kerrigan some romantic tension and finally like let her have a boyfriend. The thing is, the fourth book ended with pretty much everybody having a boyfriend or a girlfriend except her. Zachary and Estera finally got married, and her best friend and Alton, you know, who's kind of like her backup, so to speak, are also now together, which left Kerrigan feeling very lonely, feeling bad about herself, which, you know, I understand. So now she has a third love interest, yes, a third love interest, so that she can have a man, which I thought was kind of weird because throughout all of these books, Kerrigan has been set up to be like this very strong character. Like at one point, not saying which book this was because spoilers, that's interesting, Kerrigan actually had a chance to get with King Zachary, but because she knew wrong and that they shouldn't do it, nothing happened. So it feels kind of out of character. Kerrigan is now pursuing a relationship really because she's desperate for a boyfriend. Yay, more messy clips. Speaking of Kerrigan started out the series being this like interesting, complex. She had her morals, she had her problems. She just wanted to do the right thing, but felt like everything was getting her in her way. And she really does, throughout the series, face a lot of like really big obstacles and face a whole lot of danger and get knocked down several times. You really feel for her as she goes through all of that. But slowly, more and more throughout the series, she was reduced to a Mary Sue. Those of you who do not know, a Mary Sue is essentially a term that is used for a character who has no real flaws and is perfect in every way. Kerrigan is pretty much perfect. She really doesn't get into as much danger as she used to in the previous book. She now has 3 love interests, and I think she actually, like, with the character that I mentioned earlier, who's like a gentleman thief character, who's kind of like eyeing Kerrigan, I think she actually gets a 4th love interest. So all the male characters are in love with her. She's flawless. She's like the Green Rider, who was like the first knight in 200 years, which I didn't mention, but it is what happened in book 3, I think. So yeah, she's becoming like the best character, the best this, the best that, the best everything, which is a shame because, like I said, she used to be very interesting and she's kind of become a parody of herself. The main plot of this thing is extremely slow and practically non-existent, just like the first book and the third book, and it was while I read this that I realized that Kristen Britton kind of has this formula of having one book that is pure exposition setup and then having another book that is where the action happens. I can see where she would come up with that formula because, you know, setup can be really long and you want everything to make sense, but that kind of means that like every other book is going to be super boring, but you have to read it in order to get to the next one. It's like doing homework. It's not a good formula. So, what little semblance of a plot there is that magic is essentially being, well, it's like the source of all the technology. Mornhaven the Black is basically just like sucking it up and using it in his empire to just fuel everything. He's even got like whole factories because, you know, Industrial Revolution, it only took 200 years to get there. So he is essentially just draining the life force and the magic just out of everything in Blackvale, and that is kind of like the big problem that they need to fight against. And of course Kerrigan needs magic to get back home, which like we all know she's gonna get there anyway, so obviously they have to storm Mornhaven's castle. Kerrigan is captured, Cade is captured, like I said, kind of the only semi-interesting parts of the plot, which isn't saying much, but still. And it is there that we find out that, well, Cade finds out that Kerrigan is pregnant, so now he has to take care of a girlfriend and a child. So he has more motivation than he had before. And I know what you're thinking. How's this going to work with Kerrigan going back to the present? Oh boy. We'll get to that. Now, about Mournhaven the Black and exactly what he is also draining magic from, I had a little rant that I recorded that gets into a very serious topic. If you would like to skip that and go right to this time, you absolutely can. This next part gets kind of heavy, I'm not gonna lie. So, a problem that Kristen Britain has with the series is that she uses a lot of assault, friendliest term putting it. At this point in the series, book 5, Kerrigan has been assaulted in like every other book. The first book, the third book, and they're not like just harassment or anything like that, because like there's a spectrum of bad, right? They have been like violent attempts. None of them have fallen through. I don't care. I'm not getting into that. I hate this subject so much. But, it's been pretty violent. Like, at this point, if I were this girl, I wouldn't go anywhere by myself. Oh my gosh. And a problem that happens a lot in book 5 is that this issue that's been going on throughout the series is now, emphasized by the tenfold. At the beginning of this book, Kerrigan is nearly gang in the streets and only escapes because of the professor. And then later in the book, we see Mournhaven the Black. Now, Mournhaven has been MIA for 2 books at this point. So this is the first time we see him after 2 books, the big bad of the series, who we are going to spending the rest of the series with because we are building up to his ultimate defeat, right? Here, the few one-on-one interactions with him that the audience gets is when he wakes up for the first time in 2 years, because apparently Mournhaven sleeps every 2 years, because of course he does. And he wakes up and basically a bunch of slaves are led into his chamber so that he can assault them. And one of the servants mentions how they're going to be cleaning up corpses later, which, I'm no expert, but I think he's doing it wrong. Only joke I'm going to make throughout this whole section, I'm sorry. And seriously, our villain is like this, who we're going to be spending the entire series with him. We could have learned more about him, made him more interesting, more intimidating, all that stuff, but no. She made him a assaulter person because to make him scary, basically. And then we meet a character called the Witch, who has been Mournhaven's source of power, something like that. I don't remember all that well. And she, of course, has been assaulted several times by the king's guards too. Some of them even have carved initials into her because she's chained up. It is brutal. Reading the description for what this character has been through is extremely, extremely brutal. And Kristen Britain thought, in addition to every other brutal thing that we've seen in this book, and I'm not even done yet, that was fine to include. Then, the only other subplot that's in this book, so actually, this happened in book 4. I don't know why I said it happened in book 5, but I think my point still stands. Involves a character who is revealed to be a Padudu, because I can't say this word, or YouTube will. Why he is revealed to be like that, I do not know. It doesn't impact anything. He's essentially a bad guy character, and that quality is to make us just hate him that much more, in addition to everything he's doing to Lady Estera and King Zachary. It's even revealed that sometimes poor families will sell their kids to him for money because he's rich. This doesn't impact anything. This doesn't affect anything, and yet it's in there. Some great advice that I got from Crimson Rogue's channel, which by the way, check him out, he's great when it comes to reviewing books, is if you can use anything other than don't use. Kristen Britain has used this so much in this book. It's excessive. It's a really sensitive topic, and she just stuffed it in there pretty much as often as she could. The only time that it seemed to amount to anything is to show how women in Mornhaven's kingdom are treated so horribly compared to the way they were in Saccaridia. But there are other ways to do that besides like the most brutal one that exists. Kristen Britton put a lot of assault in her book because it is shocking and grabs the audience's attention. Now, Kristen Britton, I don't believe is a bad author or is terrible, so I'm not going to go ahead and say like she's insensitive or anything like that. I wish that somebody had like told her that this is too much and that this is too excessive, or that like she had rethought it before putting it into a book, because look how thick this book is, and that has to be a big part of it. She does not have a justifiable enough reason to put it in this book. If you ever want to use a sensitive topic, which it's her book, she's allowed to, make sure you're doing it for a good reason, or make sure you know what you're talking about. Alright, now that that's done. So, through magical means, Kerrigan and Cade are forced to split apart. There was a plan to have Kerrigan brought over, but unfortunately for Kerrigan, not us, that did not happen. She arrives back in Saccaridia just like a few months after she had left. She tells the king and his armies that the person who betrays the king, allowing for Mornhaven to return, is some guy that had never been important until now. Which, by the way, Kerrigan just kind of like comes out of nowhere, is barely conscious and recovering from something, and says, that guy's going to make trouble. And everyone's just me like, okay, let's arrest that dude. She didn't need proof. She didn't need nothing. She was just like, I will accuse that person of committing treason and eventually causing a horrible empire to rise in our place. And everyone was like, yeah, let's do it. Now, this was the part that made me so mad. So, the doctors are inspecting Kerrigan, and they find out that she was pregnant, but whatever was in there is just gone, vanished. Not through a miscarriage, not through the removal process, just it vanished. What does that mean? That means that is total confirmation that everything we just read didn't happen. It was the most nothingest nothing to ever nothing. And I know some of you might be thinking, well, isn't Kerrigan going to be devastated that her baby's gone? Well, guess what? She never knew she was pregnant to begin with. Only Cade knew that. Problem solved. And then also, Kerrigan is slowly starting to forget the events of everything that we just read, which, again, reinforces that none of it happened. She's trying to say, like, Cade over and over and over again in her mind so that she doesn't forget Cade, even though she is going to eventually. And yeah, that's pretty much just how the book ends. Holy cow, I have never seen a book that was so empty, so void, if you will, of anything substantial. This book series started out good, maybe not the greatest series ever, but good, and then we got to this point. How does that... I will, of course, be reading the next book for you guys, actually the next 2 books for you guys, but it might take a while because I'm like the slowest reader on the planet. Oh my gosh. Maybe things will improve with those books, although I'm not 100% optimistic, but you never know, and we will see. Thank you guys so much for watching. I know that today's video was probably not as fun as we were all hoping it would be, but unfortunately I just thought there were some things I need to address. Please hit the like, subscribe button. You guys have no idea how much it means for me. Please follow me on all my socials. They're in my channel description, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!